Alrighty, welcome in everyone to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Tuesday, October 7th around here, and we got a big time weekend to break down. We just had week 6 with a couple of massive upsets that we'll start with. We'll talk about Texas, we'll talk about Penn State, and how this might not get a whole lot better for those two teams, at least this season, and we'll talk about the future of James Franklin around State College. Then we'll get into Alabama and Miami getting some state wins, including a couple other teams, particularly in the Big 12, that got some massive wins that could totally inform what the rest of the season looks like. And then we'll do a little bit of a whip around to all the other games. Texas A&M looks really, really good right about now. Michigan gets a win that looked okay, didn't look all the way through, but definitely that passing game looked a whole lot better, and plenty of other stuff coming at the very end of the show. But let's go ahead and jump into this, and let's start with the two biggest stories of the weekend. Weirdly enough, neither of the two ranked games are a part of the biggest stories of the weekend, but Texas and Penn State both fall this last weekend, and two very different stories in some respects, but a lot of the same thing. You know, the number 1 and the number 2 teams in the country officially unranked going into this upcoming weekend, but going into this past weekend, they were fully ranked. Texas was number 9 in the country, and they fall to Florida 29-21. This one is sort of kind of a warm-up for Penn State in some respects. This one is bad in a lot of different ways for Texas, and we'll get into that here in a second. I want to talk about Florida first, but for Penn State, it might be a little bit worse, and we'll talk about that here in a second, of course. But let's start with Florida. They won the football game. They deserve all the respect in the world because this was about Texas being bad, but Florida looked the part. For the first time this year, it looked like a team that had a quarterback that was fully prepared, which I don't think is an accident because this last 2 weeks might have been the first full 2 weeks that DJ Lagway's been able to practice all the way through in his entire career, and that's not even a joke. He has not been able to practice for a long time and actually got dinged up in this game, so we'll talk about that when we get into the Texas A&M game for Florida coming up. But at the end of the day, it looked like a team that was playing together. Napier finally leaned into who is his best player on the football team, which is Jaden Ball, and then you add in a guy like Dallas Wilson, the star freshman that everyone around Gainesville knew was going to be special, but I think a lot of people around the country didn't fully know the name. Now you know the name. Went for 111 yards, 2 touchdowns, and kind of dragged a couple of Texas players into the end zone for the second one there. But an incredible player. One of those guys that totally changes the complexion of that offense that in a lot of ways was lacking that guy. Was lacking the guy that you could just say, oh, he's in single coverage, we're going to throw in that direction, he's probably going to make a play. Now you have Vernell Brown Jr. playing at a really high level, Dallas Wilson back into the mix, Eugene Wilson still a player on this football team that will make plays for you. This is an offense that can put it together. Now, there's a big-time question mark there, which is Billy Napier has been a guy that has gotten up for a big-time matchup and then kind of faded away for in some matchups. He has to find a way to keep this going week through week. I think you have to find a way to keep DJ Lagway healthy, and we can talk about the Billy Napier situation here for a second because it is a conversation to be had. You know, a lot of people talking about how he's officially saved his job or he's on his way to saving his job. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, first of all. If they play that level of football the rest of the year, if that's the Florida that we're getting, especially or on both sides of the ball, really, but on the line of scrimmage especially, I feel pretty confident they're going to win about 7 or 8 games and he's going to keep his job. I do feel confident in that. That is no given by any respect. I don't know what DJ Lagway is going to look like this upcoming weekend. I don't know what the Florida offense is going to look like. I don't know if that's the team that we're getting going forward. I don't know if that was a product of them just feeling really good coming off a bye week, if that was a product of Texas not executing at a high level. Whatever that is, we'll find out over the next couple of weeks. He is not safe by any respect. I can promise you that, at least not as of right now. One other thing that I can tell you is if Napier's out the door, so is DJ Lagway, so is Jaden Ball, so is Vernell Brown, so is Dallas Wilson. So you probably got to think about it just a little bit longer. Now, it's not to say that you should keep him just to keep those players in the building. That's always a ridiculous way to go about leading a football program. But that being said, there is a conversation to be had here. And if that's the Florida that you're getting going forward, I can almost promise you Billy Napier is going to keep that job. Now, I can't promise that's the Florida you're going to get going forward. That's been the Achilles heel of his time there and definitely something he's going to have to deal with going forward. But if they play that level of football, they can win in a College Station this upcoming weekend. They can win a lot of the big-time games they have coming forward. And then Billy Napier sitting at the end of the year still surviving somehow. I had totally buried this guy multiple different times in the past, but he keeps coming to life, and this team fights. That's one thing that you cannot argue about Billy Napier's time there is every single week this team fights for that head coach. So They obviously care about him. They obviously want him to be around and want him to succeed. This might be a little bit tougher a decision than Florida wants to make. But at the end of the day, some people think it delayed the inevitable. Some people think they're going to find their way to 8-4 and he's going to totally save everything. I don't know. It's totally up in the air, and frankly, we won't really know until they take the field against Texas A&M and we see what that looks like. So Florida got the performance that they're absolutely capable of. They are capable of playing that level of football and competing with good teams. Now, we'll talk about Texas here in a second. That was bad from them in a number of ways, but at the end of the day, they get a big-time win there, one that they absolutely needed, and Billy Napier, let's say, extends his stay for a little bit longer around Gainesville. We'll see what happens this weekend and how that informs the decision, because very well he could be fired by the time we're talking next week, or he could be rolling again with another big-time win. It's all up in the air for Florida. As for Texas, that was really gross in a number of different ways. And the lines of scrimmage is where a lot of people are focusing. That's where I'm going to focus too. That offensive line's a problem, and it's not going to get a ton better. Now, it could get marginally better. These are still young players that are going to get a little bit better. I think Brandon Baker is going to play better football. I tend to believe a lot of those players are going to be better players going down the road. The problem is it's not going to get a ton better. It's never going to be a strength for this football team. They're going to have to play around it, and that is a massive problem, especially for a Steve Sarkisian offense that wants everything to be long developing, deep crossers and comebacks and everything that takes a little bit of time, and you need pass pro guys to handle it. They're not going to be able to do that this year. They're going to have to find a way to get around teams, to spread them out just a little bit more. Everyone wants to commit to this, max protect because we have to give more bodies. It's not helping. They're getting home with 4 guys regardless of if you're protecting with 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. It doesn't make a difference. Spread the guys out. Use the talent that you have on the edges to try to get this offense off the ground, because it can't just be Arch Manning gets hit and absolutely ripped one play, then he steps out and makes a nice play downfield, and then he throws a pick the next play. You're not giving this kid a shot. And it's not to say that Arch Manning doesn't deserve blame for this game. He had the 2 picks. They were not good at all by any means, and he absolutely needs to get better. He also had 300 of Texas' 340 yards. He was the leading rusher in this game. He got pressured 35 times on 29 passes. He got 11 rushing yards from his running backs in general. It's not good enough. And as a guy making his second road start, his 7th start as a whole, and I get it. He's an easy guy to blame. He's got Manning on the back of his jersey. He's supposed to be better than this. I'm not arguing that. What I am arguing is, if you find a quarterback in the country that can succeed under those circumstances in that environment, please let me know, because he's worth a whole lot of money to just about everyone in the country. He's going to be the number 1 pick in the draft, and I can't find that guy in the country. Maybe Garrett Nussmeier, maybe. But as of right now, he is injured, and I don't think he would be able to succeed all that well against this Florida defense, and he didn't when he played them. So at the end of the day, I get it. There's a lot of energy to be pushed towards Arch Manning, and he deserves plenty of that energy. I'm not arguing that by any means. I'm arguing that if you took the Arch Manning out of it, and that's something we can't do, I totally get that. If Texas had an offensive line that could block for this kid, if the wide receivers and the running backs were making people miss instead of going down at the first contact, if Steve Sarkisian was giving him answers early in this game instead of saying, you're going to have to find a way to run for your life and then make a play downfield, you have an issue going forward. If you can't get that figured out, if you keep putting Arch Manning in spots that he is not comfortable yet because he's not a seasoned quarterback. I get he's supposed to be a little bit smarter than this. At the end of the day, he's not all the way there yet, and you're leaving him out to dry in a lot of ways. So you're making what are genuine problems look a whole lot worse than they actually are, because this offensive line's not helping, because the wide receivers aren't helping them, and frankly, on Saturday, the coaches weren't helping them too much either. So a lot of stuff to figure out for this Texas offense. No two ways about it. For the Texas defense, you got to play better. Somehow you got pushed around by a team that has plenty of dudes up front. It's not to say that Florida shouldn't push teams around. It's just to say you shouldn't be one of those teams. You should be physical enough at the University of Texas. That should never be a problem. It shouldn't be a problem on the offensive line or the defensive line that you have big physical bodies that are not afraid of contact. As of right now, you got bodied because a lot of guys were trying to play a little bit finesse in that football game. You have to find ways to be a little bit more physical, to be a little bit more effort-based in the way that you block, in the way that you attack blocks on the defensive side of the ball, and you got to find a way to get some offense out of this kid. You got to find a way to get the ball out of his hands quicker, because DJ Lagway had the quickest quickest snap to throw time in the entire country this past weekend because they knew that what they were looking at with the Texas pass rush. For the Texas team, everything was long developing, and you saw what happened. Arch Manning got absolutely ripped, and if you walk that offensive line with that level of effort and that level of gameplay into the Oklahoma game, Arch Manning's probably not leaving it. At least not healthy. I'll just be totally honest with you. It is going to be a very, very tough game this weekend if you can't figure out a lot of things. I've said it before. I said it on Twitter. This is going to be one of the most important weeks in the Steve Sarkisian era at Texas, because if you find a way to win that game this upcoming weekend, everything's back on track. You're 4-2 going into a Kentucky game that you feel really confident about. You lose, you're 3-3, and people are asking questions about what the future of that program is, especially with the quarterback that you have. So a lot of stuff to figure out for Texas. For Florida, all the respect in the world. They did an incredible job. We'll talk about Billy Napier more down the road, and we'll see if he can continue to try to save his job. But as of right now, Texas got a lot of things to figure out, and it doesn't look like it's going to get a whole lot better. It looks like 8 wins might be awesome for this Texas team at this point. But we'll see what happens. Obviously, a lot more time to go, and a big one this weekend that could turn a lot of things around. Then you got this one, and this one's a little bit worse. Somehow, it's a little bit worse. And it's not to say that Penn State played a ton worse than Texas did, or Penn State is a ton worse than Texas is, because I don't think they are. It's because you know what you have. It's because a lot of guys on this football team and a lot of starters on this football team forgoed the NFL draft to come back. It's because you have a quarterback that has played 3 years. You have running backs that have played for a long time. You have an offensive line that's very experienced. You have pass catchers that, while new to the program, are experienced players. You pretty much know who you are. And that's a really, really frustrating thing for Penn State fans. Now, obviously, you can play better football. I expect you to play better football going forward. And I think you're going to get to 8 wins regardless, if I'm being totally honest, because of the schedule that you're going to go up against. And that's something we can talk about moving forward with Penn State. But at the end of the day, this is kind of the team that you have. This is definitely the coaching staff that you have. And that's something you got to figure out. And there's one common denominator, and we will talk about James Franklin plenty at the end of this thing. But again, let's start with the UCLA because they won the day. And what a day for Nico Iamaleava. I get it. A lot of talk in the offseason. I took part in plenty of the talk in the offseason. I think he made a little bit of a mistake leaving Tennessee in some respects. That kid's playing really good football. And he's playing confident. He's playing on time. He's playing the way that a lot of people have been waiting on him to play. Now, a lot of that's with his legs. You still want to see more in the pass game, of course. But when he goes 166, 2 touchdowns passing, 128 rushing, and 3 touchdowns, he's doing everything you're asking of him. He even called plays at certain points in this game. And that's who we got to talk about maybe most readily is Jerry Neuheisel. He's the headline here. I do want to give some love to Tim Skipper. At the end of the day, he is the head coach. He was the special assistant to Deshaun Foster before Deshaun was fired. He wanted him to succeed. I can absolutely promise you that. He did everything in his power to make sure the Deshaun Foster era was the moment that turned UCLA around. It wasn't working by any means. And able to rally the troops after getting, not joking by any means, absolutely manhandled by New Mexico and dominated by UNLV earlier in the season, you find a way to put together this performance. The defense is not great, and it's not going to be great. Let's just be totally honest. But at the end of the day, you are getting everything out of a quarterback that is uniquely talented. One way or the other. He wasn't playing his best football. He's finally playing free. He finally looks like he's not thinking about it. He's just ripping the ball out there. Obviously, some things to go on the offensive side of the ball, particularly passing for him. But at the end of the day, when this kid is playing confident, you're going to find very few more talented, just outright talented quarterbacks in the entire country, and he showed it on Saturday. It was really, really awesome to watch. Jerry Neuheisel, let's just talk about it here for a second, had essentially 2 days to put everything together, started on Wednesday, entered new plays, put together new systems, and found a way to put together an offensive plan that worked, and it was a masterpiece from start to finish. I don't know how he didn't know how to call plays, but at the end of the day, it's a very, very new thing for him. Didn't call a play on a 4th and 1 that they got stopped on, missed a couple of ones, definitely needs to get a little bit better at that, but we'll have a little bit of time to put it together now that they've gotten this win. Incredible. And I said it on Twitter afterwards. There's a lot of things that UCLA can do going forward. There's a lot of things that they will do at the end of the season, both with the portal and their head coach and the alignment of the university, maybe even the athletic department and the athletic director. That's a totally different conversation. Whatever you do, I don't care who the next head coach is. It probably won't be Jerry Neuheisel, with all due respect. it has to involve him. One way or another, Jerry Neuheisel has to be involved in whatever the future is for UCLA football. Every team has their guy. Every team has the guy that loves that program more than anyone else in the entire world. Jerry Neuheisel is that for UCLA. My guy Liam Blutman might be a very, very close second, but at the end of the day, he needs to be a part of what you're doing going forward. Period. End of story. Stanford has this with Andrew Luck, and although it's a little bit dark right now, I feel confident that Andrew Luck's going to find a way to do it because he loves Stanford, and he wants that program to be talented. He wants that program to be good. That's what Jerry Neuheisel wants. No matter what you do going forward, no matter who you hire, no matter which way you go, no matter what the future looks like for UCLA football, Jerry Neuheisel has to be in the building because he gives you an edge. He gives you something that not every program has, and that is a guy that fully understands what this fan base wants, and he's understood his entire life. This is him. He is UCLA, and he needs to be a part of this. A huge amount of respect to the UCLA players. All the energy last week, or a lot of it at the very least, was going to fired head coaches and the teams that were going to lose players. And some guys that were medically redshirting, some guys that were just leaving programs, going into the portal. That happened all over the place this past week. Didn't really happen at UCLA. I'm sure it happened here and there. Didn't really see any major stories, but at the end of the day, they found a way to get to come together to put this thing together after a week of playing a UC or a Northwestern team that you probably felt like you could have beat, and you fall short. You find a way to come back home and you pull off probably the craziest P4 upset that I've ever seen. Maybe not the craziest upset. Now, it's pretty darn close if I'm being totally honest. If you watch this UCLA team through the first 4 weeks, I wouldn't have bet on them to beat anyone, truthfully anyone in the entire country, if I'm being totally honest. But at the end of the day, they find a way to beat Penn State. They find a way to get it done, and it's an incredible win. It's an incredible moment for this program. I don't know what the rest of the season looks like. I don't know what the future looks like for UCLA. I know that they have a path forward, and for a long time, it really didn't look like that. So, huge amount of credit to Deshaun Foster, huge amount of credit to Tim Skipper, huge amount of credit Tim Skipper, to Jerry Neuheisel, to Nico Imaliava, to all of the players on this team, because that is not an easy thing to do. Now it's Penn State's turn, and when I was doing the preview for this game, I said Penn State has a vacation to LA coming up. I was not being serious, and I don't think they knew that because they treated this like a vacation, especially on the defensive side of the ball. They did not take this game as seriously as they should have. I get it. It's not a good football team, or at least it wasn't going into Saturday. At the end of the day, they got a talented quarterback, and they had some talent on the outsides. Penn State wasn't prepared for any of it. And from start to finish, they got out-coached, they got out-schemed, they got outmanned by a team that they shouldn't have any of that happen to them against. So, a lot of things to figure out. The problem is Drew Allar was really good in this game. It's not the same problems. It's not you're just looking at the same thing week over week. The defense is just not very good. The defense is just a little bit slow. They're not in the right position. Frankly, they're not calling a great game as Jim Knowles and that defensive staff. And that's a whole other problem because he paid him $3 million to come over from your rival. But at the end of the day, you have a lot of things to figure out if you're Penn State. And I don't think you have the youth that Texas has to fall back on. Now, it's not necessarily a great thing to fall back on if you're Texas. It doesn't make you better right now, but at the very least makes you feel better about the future. I don't know what you feel if you're a Penn State fan right now. I really don't, because at the end of the day, what Penn State was for so long under James Franklin was they're not going to beat Ohio State, they're not going to beat Michigan. They're going to be a really good football team, and they're not going to fall in these games that every other team finds a way to fall in. They're going to play the game the way that they're supposed to every single week. Yeah, they'll fall short against the elite teams, but it's never going to happen against one of these teams. Well, it's happened against one of these teams, and you have to find a way to salvage this, and I don't know what that looks like. If I'm being totally honest, I think the schedule sets up nicely where you can get to 8 wins and you can find a way to feel okay about what happened this season, but at the end of the day, I don't think you're walking into 2026 feeling great about James Franklin if you're walking in with him at all. That's the big time question around State College right now. I think a lot of people want him gone. I think a lot of people realize that $56 million in a buyout is not ideal at this very moment for Penn State when you're trying to keep up with Oregon and Ohio State and Michigan and all those other teams in the Big Ten. So I don't know what's going to happen. I really don't. I don't know what's going to happen going forward with that game. It was weird how this one unfolded because when they block the punt, when they get within 6, you're thinking, okay, they've officially buckled in, and then they let UCLA march back down the field. And then Penn State's able to get back within 6, maybe have a little bit of momentum, and then UCLA marches right back down the field and scores a touchdown. So it was bad. And I really don't know what the path forward is. I don't know what the future looks like this year or going forward. I tend to believe that the James Franklin experience is going to come to an end at some point here pretty soon. And I don't know how much of that is on James Franklin, how much of that is on the rest of the team, how much of that is on the athletic department at Penn State. All of that's up in the air. What I do know is a lot was sunk into this football team. A lot of guys coming back from the NFL, a lot of new coordinators coming in, one in particular that not exactly working out the way you want them to. A lot was put into this football team, and you can't go 7-5. You maybe can go 8-4 and try to find a way to come back next season, but you've lost this fan base, at least for the time being, and we'll see what happens going forward. It is going to be tough to watch what happens here going forward, and we'll see if Penn State makes the tough decision to move on. We'll see if they stick with the guy. I don't know how much better you're getting with somebody new other than James Franklin, at least in the short term. Maybe in the long term you can get better. So we'll see what happens going forward with Penn State. It is a totally up in the air situation. I think it's a little bit worse than the Texas situation in some ways, just because you have that veteran leadership, you have that veteran identity of this football team, whereas Texas is a little bit younger, and you have to assume they're going to get a little bit better throughout the year. But at the end of the day, that schedule sets up to where James Franklin might be able to keep his job without actually coaching better football. And that is a frustrating thing for a lot of Penn State fans. For UCLA, they get Michigan State this upcoming weekend. Michigan State gave up 40 to Boston College. So let's see what happens with this UCLA team going forward. It could fall on its face the rest of the way and they go 1-11. They could find a little bit of a groove here and go and be able to win 3 or 4 games. And then we're talking about them as one of the weirder but more interesting stories the rest of the way. But overall, Penn State and Texas left something on the table on Saturday, and they're going to leave a lot on the table this season. I think it's really hard for me to look forward and say Texas is going to be able to find a way to make the playoff after this, or Penn State's going to be able to find a way to go beat Ohio State. I don't think either of those things are going to happen. I think if you're going to get that offensive line play from Texas, you're probably looking at a 7-5 team. I tend to believe Sark is going to be much better prepared this upcoming Saturday, but I don't know if that's going to matter against the defense that is going to be that good on the other side with Oklahoma. So a lot of things to figure out for Texas. For Penn State, I think there's a lot of future things to figure out. For Texas, you're not quite there yet, but for Penn State, I think there's a lot of contemplating about what James Franklin's going to look like going forward, if he's going to be the coach going forward. So a lot of things to figure out. We will talk about it all as it unfolds. Of course, we'll talk about their games this upcoming week, and particularly Texas, where you can get back on track. You just got to play a whole lot better than you did this Saturday. Not a whole lot of reason to think you will. But at the end of the day, we'll talk about that as it comes up. Let's take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Miami, Alabama, and a couple other teams that had some big-time statement wins this past weekend and put themselves in great positions for the CFP going forward. We'll talk about it all right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Texas and Penn State, the two biggest stories of this past weekend. Both teams that were number 1 and number 2 in the preseason rankings now have fallen unranked and have a lot to figure out. And I don't know if it's figured out by the end of this season, but we'll see how that develops. Obviously, some huge ones coming forward for those two teams. We had some statement wins this past weekend. We had some teams that really put on some shows against some inferior teams, some teams that probably are right on their level, but some massive ones here. And let's start with maybe the most important one of the day, and that was Alabama gets a big-time win over Vanderbilt 30-14. This one was interesting because I think you look at the score, and really you look at the score throughout the football game, and you're thinking, okay, Alabama and Vanderbilt played a good football game. They kind of battled back and forth. There was a little bit here, a little bit there, but Alabama was able to make enough plays late in the game. And that was sort of the case. Alabama kind of rolled in this football game. And it's not to say Vanderbilt played terribly or Vanderbilt doesn't deserve respect, because they did a lot of good stuff. There's no doubt about that. And they fought, especially early in this game, got up 7-0. But Alabama had about the worst start you could possibly have. You have Ty Simpson throw a pick on the very first drive. Vanderbilt's able to score. Then they come down, miss a field goal, and you're down 7-0, and you're thinking, we're in a really bad spot going forward. And then it was kind of lights out from there on forward. Now, there was a number of things that happened throughout there that Alabama deserves a lot of respect for. Vandy deserves a lot of respect for. But I think you're in a position where Bama was able to score on all but one drive the rest of the way after the first quarter. They were able to pretty much dominate this game. They did just about everything you wanted them to do. Also, got Jam Miller going. Went for over 100 yards in this game. The first time a running back's done that for Alabama, I think since Jace McClellan in 2023. Shows how crazy important Jalen Milroe was to that team and that offense for the last couple of years. But at the end of the day, this is a team that if they get that run game going, you're probably not holding them under 28, plain and simple. And that defense is starting to play better football. This Vandy offense has some things to figure out. It feels like the SEC teams have started to sort of figure out this offense just a little bit from Tim Beck, but obviously something that we'll see kind of bear itself out the rest of the season. For Diego Pavia, there's a lot of conversation around the talk that he had coming into the game about the kneeling in the pregame. I don't know if he does that every game. I don't know if anyone really does or anyone's confirmed or denied that. At the end of the day, I think it's all fair. I think him talking trash going into the game, all fair. There's football. That's is part of the fun. Lean into it. That's all well and good. I think the guy yelling him at the end, although I think it's a little bit classless, at the end of the day, I get it. And I think you just got to take your beating and kind of go on your way because you did talk trash going into this football game. You did say you were going to roll them if you played your football. You didn't play your football, to be totally fair, so I guess you weren't proven wrong in some respect. But at the end of the day, Alabama rolled in this game. They really dominated it pretty much from start to finish. Obviously, a little bit of a slow start, but there was never a moment where I didn't feel like Alabama was going to win this game, if I'm being totally honest. And I think they're the real deal. There's still some questions around what this team's going to be week over week, because that's a question that Kalen DeBoer kind of earned himself last year with a lot of inconsistent performances. But at the end of the day, you're in a position where you're going to be a ton more consistent. And it's not necessarily a Jalen Milroe's fault necessarily. Ty Simpson's a better thrower of the football, and he's a much better thrower of the football than a whole lot of people in that conference, a whole lot of people in the country right about now. I saw Joe Klatt make the comment that if he was Ty Manning, we'd probably give him the Heisman right about now, and he's probably right. Ty Simpson's playing ridiculously good football right about now, and I think they're in a position where you move forward, a lot of things to figure out, a lot of things to get a little bit better at, the run game continuing to develop that. But you got 3 weeks coming up that are massively important. You got Missouri, Tennessee, South Carolina. If you find a way to win those 3 football games, you're probably finding yourself in Atlanta at the end of the year. You're almost definitely finding yourself in the CFP. If you drop one of those games, then you're walking a little bit of a tightrope, but I still think this team is in a great position moving forward. There is some massive things that they're going to be able to do going forward, especially if that run game continues to develop that they weren't able to do a year ago. They weren't able to do even in the year that they found their way to the playoff and did some incredible things under Nick Saban. This team's going to be more complete. They're going to be able to do a lot of the things that Bama fans have been waiting for quite some time. This was a really incredible win. For Vandy, you made some mistakes that you don't normally make, plain and simple. You get a bye week and then you get LSU, Missouri, and Texas. Season's far from over. You got a lot of battling to do. There's no doubt about that. I think LSU is going to play a whole lot better. Missouri's playing really good football. I think Texas is going to play better. I can't say a whole lot better, but I think they're going to play better. You got a whole an important month coming up. If you're Vanderbilt, if you find a way to go 2-1 in those games, you feel great. If you find a way to go 1-2, you feel okay. If you go 0-3, then a lot of things are questioned very quickly, and then the Diego Pavia era probably ends on a sour note, but plenty of time to go. Still feel very good about this football team. Fought really hard in this game and did some nice things, just made some mistakes they're not used to making. Miami got again, kind of a dominating win, although they only won by 6 points. They were up by 25 going into the fourth quarter. Then Florida State's able to rip off a couple of touchdowns, and Miami kind of had to get this offense back going, and it didn't really work. And that's something to watch going forward because it has kind of been a theme of their games early on where they'll play incredibly. They'll look like the best team in the country for about a half, maybe 2.5 quarters. And then it'll kind of go into a lull. And sometimes, like this game, you have a 25-point lead. You don't need to force the issue. You kind of just play football until the very end. It's not always going to work out this beautifully for them. It's not always going to work out where Florida State can't make the plays down the stretch or Florida State isn't in the position to get another touchdown on the board. Someone's going to get you, is kind of what I'm trying to say here. If they go stagnant for a quarter and a half, they go stagnant for 2 quarters because they feel like they have the game in hand, you're going to have a problem at some point. It's something that a number of teams have dealt with, and I think something Mario Cristobal is just going to have to get a little bit more used to. Just lean on teams. Be the team that you are all the way for 60 minutes. Now, if you get up by 30 points, by 40 points, then you can kind of lean off the throttle a little bit, no doubt about it, but you gave Florida State just a little bit too much time in this game, and you did enough to get away with the win. Not saying that they played poorly by any means, but you might just want to keep the foot on the gas just a little bit more going forward, because then I think you're winning these games comfortably and you're far and away the number one team in the country. As of right now, I feel really confident in you at your best. I don't know how consistently we're going to get your best, I think is the big time question here, especially throughout football games. But Carson Beck's incredibly efficient and accurate. The duo of CJ Daniels and Malachi Toney is becoming one of the very best in the country. The run game continues to be a little bit hit or miss, but something that I do think they're going to continue to get better at, especially with the freaks they have across the offensive line. This is a really good Miami team, plain and simple. There's no doubt about that. I have some questions moving forward, mainly because they're not going to play a team that resembles a Florida State or resembles a Texas or a Georgia or an Alabama or one of these teams they could face the rest of the season in those big moments until those big moments. And that's going to be a big-time question. They get Louisville after a bye, then they get a couple tough games, but at the end of the day, from a physicality perspective, it's going to take a massive jump up when or if they get to the CFP, and that's going to be a big-time question. But frankly, don't have to worry about that right now. Where now you have to worry about not getting got the rest of the way, because you should beat every team on your schedule the rest of the way, probably by about 14 points, if I'm being totally honest. If you take your foot off the gas, then you're going to have a problem, plain and simple. So a lot of things to figure out for this team. Got to feel really good. If you're Miami, just got to stay locked in, because last year you had a team that looked really good through a couple of weeks and then took their foot off the gas and lost 2 games that they had no business losing at the end of the year. So a lot of things still to go for Miami. You got to feel really confident in this team's ability to make the CFP and maybe their ability to win a national title this year. But for Florida State, it's kind of a confusing conversation, because going into the season, if I were to tell you that they're 3-2 right now, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, they're 3-2. If I were to tell you they were 3-2 right now, you probably wouldn't be too surprised, right? They lost to Miami. They probably lost to Alabama. That's not how it went down. They beat Alabama. Everyone starts talking about them going to the playoff and winning the ACC and doing all this incredible stuff, flipping it around like that. And then they lose these 2 past games. And you're thinking, okay, now what does it look like? I think they can get to 8-4. And I think that's a win. I think we don't want to lose the perspective of what it was coming into the season and what last season really was for Florida State. If they find a way to get to 8 wins, which I think they will, they get Pitt next week with a young quarterback and a confident offense, so a lot of things to figure out there. But at the end of the day, you win that game, you continue to move forward. This is a good football team, and I think they're doing enough in the year right after a year where everything bottomed out and everything went poorly. And I think you're in a position now where you move forward. Just try to keep the perspective from the preseason, not the one that you had after the Alabama game. I know that's very tough to do, but at the end of the day, an 8-4 season where you lose to a Miami, but you're able to get a win later in the year against a Clemson or against a Louisville or against one of these other good teams in the ACC, you got to feel pretty confident. For Miami, they're rolling. They're going to be really, really hard to stop. The attention turns to Mario Cristobal and the coaches, because you just got to not take your foot off the gas. The rest of the way, make sure that you guys are locked in every single weekend, because while the ACC isn't quite as strong as some of the other conferences, there's teams that can beat you any given week. So you got to make sure you guys are ready. If they are, you should be able to roll into the ACC title and really roll into the CFP. Texas Tech gets a 35-11 win over Houston, and they keep shutting people up, including myself. I bet on Houston to cover the spread in this one, and Texas Tech didn't even give them a shot. From the opening whistle, that defensive line dominated them from start to finish. And the big-time question around Texas Tech is, can they win a national title? I don't think we have to worry about that right now. Frankly, this is a very good football team, and they're playing really, really high-level football. You have that level of defensive line, you're going to be able to do a lot of special things, plain and simple. As of right now, let's try to handle the Big 12, because I still think there's quite a few hurdles there and quite a few things to figure out. Baron Morton coming out and looking really solid, looking healthy is massive. The run game, being able to take over in this game is awesome. 205 yards from Jacoby Williams and Cameron Dickey, I was trying to remember his name, combined incredible duo that they have. Also, Cameron Dickey had a great receiving touchdown. Really good team. They move on to Kansas State, and then they get at Arizona State. They win those 2. This could be an undefeated team at the end of the year. they very well could lose to Arizona State, and then it's a little bit up in the air. At the end of the day, they got to keep rolling. They got to keep their attention locked in. I tend to believe this team will, just because they haven't been there in quite some time. Joey McGuire is a very, very aggressive, intense head coach. I think the foot's going to stay on the throttle, but Texas Tech still has a little bit of work to do. A lot of confidence around this football team right now. Probably the team that I would bet on most readily to make the playoff, at least right this second. Them and Miami would probably be setting the pace for me. For Houston, still has plenty of juice moving forward. I think if you get to 8 wins, you're in a really good position moving forward under Willie Fritz. You have a really good quarterback coming in Keyshawn Henderson upcoming in. I think you got to feel confident. You get Oklahoma State next week, then you get both the Arizona schools back-to-back. You got to feel pretty good if you're Houston moving forward. It might not be a Big 12 champion crazy type year, but I think it's going to be a really solid one for the Cougars. Iowa State loses to Cincinnati 38-30. This was a statement game from Cincinnati in a lot of different ways. An incredible, incredible game from the Bearcats where they just kind of kept their foot on Iowa State's throat. There was a number of moments where you felt like maybe Iowa State can put it together. They get down by 10, they get down by 8, they'd find a way to cut it to one score, and then Cincinnati hits a big play. And frankly, the refs tried to give him a couple, Iowa State that is, and Cincinnati was able to hit an 83-yard dagger to Caleb Goody to kind of put this one on ice in a lot of respects, but Cincinnati scored on every possession in the first half, and then they sort of throttled back, and Iowa State was able to claw their way back into it, so a lot of respect to Iowa State, and I still think is going to be a really tough team moving forward, will be firmly in the mix for the Big 12 moving forward, because if they get healthy in that secondary, which was the massive problem in this game, you're missing guys like Jontez Williams in a big way. And I think if you get those guys back, you're in a position where you can win over Colorado this upcoming weekend. You get a bye, then you got BYU, Arizona State, TCU. So a massive moment for their season. They're still very much in play. For Cincinnati, you got to feel great. And it's a team that I don't think a lot of people were paying attention to going into the season, but Brendan Sorsby is ripping the ball around. A lot of confidence in this run game. Tawi Walker just ran through a guy's face on Saturday. It was incredible to watch what this team did. They get UCF and Oklahoma State the next 2 games, so they should be able to win those games. They will be favored in those games. I can promise you that. And then they get Houston, Arizona, BYU, TCU to finish out the season. This team is still very much alive for Arlington. They're going to have to play this level of football the rest of the way if they want to make it there, but love the Bearcats right now and feel really good about what Brendan Sorsby can do the rest of the season. And then Virginia gets a 30-27 win where, weirdly enough, if you look at the play-by-play, you think, man, Louisville really came back to make this one a game, to force overtime. Really incredible job to claw back into this one. Louisville kind of created that gap for themselves in a lot of respects, especially with a couple of turnovers that were just downright terrible. You had a fumble from Isaac Brown that was taken back to the house. You had maybe the worst pick six I've ever seen, if I'm being totally honest, for Miller Moss, where he keeps himself in the air just to throw it right into the gut of a linebacker. Really tough in a lot of ways. So I think if you're Louisville, you're probably looking back on this one thinking, we should have had it. We make one less mistake in those games. If we give up the ball one less time, then we're in good shape. If Miller Moss's knee gets down a fraction of a second earlier, we're in good shape moving forward. At the end of the day, now you lose this game, and then you get a week off in Miami. I don't know if it's going to be great. Now, I do think this is a dangerous team moving forward. I do think they're a team that can absolutely get back in the relative conversation and kind of trip some people up. But you lose to a team like Virginia that set up really well the rest of the season. You have Miami coming up here pretty soon and a relatively tough schedule after that. Can't feel overly confident in Louisville as of right now. I think they're going to be a good team. I don't know how much of an effect they're going to have on the ACC moving forward. Virginia's very much in this thing. They're 3-0 in the conference because that NC State game earlier in the season wasn't a conference game, weirdly enough. But at the end of the day, they get Washington State this upcoming weekend. That should be a pretty comfortable win. That's out of conference anyway. Then you get at UNC, at Cal, Wake Forest, at Duke, and Virginia Tech. You're in pretty good shape. You win that game at Duke, you're on your way to Charlotte. There's almost no doubt in my mind. Now, there's definitely some things that can get in your way if Miami goes undefeated and then a Georgia Tech goes undefeated and beats Duke. Then you might have a little bit of a hurdle there, but at the end of the day, this is a very good football team. I think they got to find a way to win the ACC. I hate to say that in a lot of ways because I think they should get some respect if they find a way to get to the ACC title, but I think it's fair to say Virginia, Georgia Tech, Duke, these teams that are kind of right on the cusp of the ACC spot, the other ACC title spot with Miami, they probably got to win that game to get there. Now, Georgia Tech might be the one outlier because if they find a way to beat Georgia, then obviously they would have a little bit more wiggle room. But at the end of the day, I think it's probably going to have to be ACC title or bust for some of those second-tier teams, and that's a tough thing to deal with. But at the end of the day, Virginia's playing really good football. They should move forward with a lot of confidence and feel pretty good. With that Duke game being kind of the epicenter of their season, they find a way to win that one. They are right on their way to Charlotte, and then who knows what happens in 60 minutes against Miami. But an incredible weekend for a lot of those teams. I think Bama might have been the most impressive to me. I kind of knew Miami was this dominant team that had the ability to win. Now, I did pick Florida State because I just thought that game would get a little bit weird, and it almost did, to be fair. But at the end of the day, came away really impressed with Alabama, really impressed with Texas Tech, continue to be really impressed with Texas Tech, but a lot of things still to go for a lot of those teams, a lot of hay to put in the barn, as they would say. But let's take our second break here. When we come back, let's just do a little bit of a whip around. We'll get into some of these games that happened this past weekend, including some crazy comeback from Baylor and Washington. We'll talk about the group of five a little bit, and then we'll touch on the Kyron Lacey story just a little bit at the end. Not a ton, but want to make sure we talk about it before we get out of here. So we'll talk about it all right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some statement wins from Alabama, Miami, Texas Tech, Cincinnati, and Virginia. Some big time wins from those teams that could very well set the pace for what the CFP is going to look like here pretty soon. And a couple other games that did that this past weekend. We'll start with a huge one in College Station. Texas A&M gets a big time win 31-9 over Mississippi State. This one's a really interesting one for a number of reasons because really Mississippi State was in this game for a comfortable majority of this game. I shouldn't say a lot of this game, but a good majority of this game. Mississippi State was within striking distance. They had the ability to make some plays early in this game and make it much more interesting, take a lead going into halftime, but they left a little bit on the table in a number of ways. A&M gives the ball, they give the ball away on the 1 yard line from Mississippi State. Then Mississippi State gives it right back, and A&M's able to take a lead going into half, 7-3. It could have been, 10-0. It could have been even 3-0 or 6-0, and then you're having a very different conversation on the Texas A&M side. But when you don't take advantage early against this Texas A&M team, they're going to be able to run on you late. They're going to be able to lean on you because that's one of the meanest and biggest offensive lines you will see in the entire country with guys like Reuben Owens, who is incredible this past weekend and is a downright special player. Had some injuries early on in his career, but is a uniquely special player that I think is going to be as good as just about any running back in the country going forward. But him, Le'Veon Moss, they have some really special guys. On top of that, you can do some special things with Craver and Concepcion. Obviously, Marcel Reed's going to be a part of that. It is going to be one of the most comprehensive run games that you have to guard all year. There's no doubt about that. They probably got to get a little bit more from Marcel Reed in the pass game in these big-time games going forward. But at the end of the day, this is a very physical team. They play the game the right way. They know exactly who they are, which is hugely important right now because look around the country. There's a lot of teams that don't know who they are or they don't know who they want to be going forward. For A&M, they know exactly what they do well, and they do it really, really well. Now, this is going to be something that they're going to have to continue to develop on. They get a Florida team that's really nasty up front, just a little bit nastier than that Mississippi State front that they're going to get this upcoming weekend. And it might be a team that may be a little bit tougher to guard than you thought they were going to be coming in. So we'll see what happens going forward. You got Arkansas, LSU, and Missouri right after that. You could go 4-0. And if you find a way to go 4-0, a lot of confidence in Aggieville, not only to get to the CFP because you feel really confident to get to the CFP if you find a way to go 4-0 in the next four, but at the end of the day to win the SEC, to maybe win a national title, and to become the team in Texas. As crazy as that sounds going into this season, it is absolutely on the table for the Aggies. It's been on the table before, so a lot of things to figure out for them, a lot of stuff still to do, but incredible stuff on this Saturday night, a team that looks a whole lot better than I frankly thought they would look as of right now. For Mississippi State, they go forward to a bye before they get Florida, and then they get Texas. So bowl game's still very much on the table. That should still really be the goal for a Mississippi State team that, kind of like Florida State, you get that big win early in the season. Maybe some expectations get a little bit out of whack, but at the end of the day, this is still a very good team. They're still making steps forward, feel really good about what Jeff Lebby's building down there. Just one of those games where you didn't take advantage of all the opportunities you were given, and you ran into a team that's just bigger, stronger, and a little bit more physical than you are as of right now. Georgia was able to get a pretty comfortable win, 35-14 over Kentucky. This feels like the game that Georgia absolutely needed. There's no doubt about that. You lose that game to Alabama, you're having a lot of questions about what you are going forward, who you're going to be, and you find a way to just kind of find even ground. It's not necessarily the most explosive football in the world. It's not necessarily going to be around Georgia with Kirby Smart, but they found a way to run the football, and I think that offensive line continues to get better. Monroe Freeling did go down in this game, which is something to watch, but sounds like he's going to be okay. I don't know what that means for this upcoming weekend against Auburn, but at the end of the day, this is a very good team. It feels like they're finding kind of their identity, finding where they want to kind of do work. It's going to be a tough game this weekend in Auburn, Alabama, and then it's Ole Miss at home. So doesn't get a whole lot easier for Georgia. They're going to still have to play some really elite football, but you got to feel really good about your chances if you're Georgia. If you win these next two games, you feel great about your chances to get to the CFP, to get back to the SEC championship, maybe win it again, and be in a great position moving forward. That Auburn game is going to be really interesting, so we'll definitely watch that going forward. For Kentucky, I'm going to leave you alone. I don't think it's going to get a whole lot better. I don't think they think it's going to get a whole lot better. So I'll go ahead and leave you alone just for a little bit here. That was a tough game. I don't think they're going to get a whole lot easier the rest of the way, but who knows? Maybe you get a one big-time upset, and that's enough, but I think everyone understands what's going on up there in Lexington. I won't pile on too much on the Wildcats. Michigan able to get a win 24-10 over Wisconsin. I think you got to feel better about that pass game coming out of this game. Now, the weird thing about this one is you did kind of get stopped on the ground, is to be expected in some respects against Wisconsin, but something to watch going forward when they play some other elite teams, some other Ohio States, and they find a way to, can they find a way to run the ball on them? Because I don't think you're going to find a way to throw the ball. But in this game, Donovan McCulley went for over 100 yards. Andrew Marsh is a freshman that's going to be an incredible player and a very important player for this offense moving forward. You got to feel good about what you have in Bryce Underwood. I still think there's questions about what that looks like against the elite teams on your conference, on your schedule moving forward. You got to feel really good about what you have right now. And you head to LA this upcoming weekend against USC. Probably got to put together your best offensive performance to date, if I'm being totally honest, to win that game. Feel pretty good that they're going to be able to do that. They continue to get better. They continue to kind of add things to that passing game. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what Michigan can be. Still a lot on the table, but I think they're in a position to really make some interesting moves going forward, especially if they can win this game this upcoming weekend. Wisconsin's in bad shape, and they get Iowa, Ohio State, Oregon, Washington, Indiana, and Illinois. I think everyone understands what's happening in Madison. I think Luke Fickell's era is going to come to an end kind of unceremoniously, not the way that I expected it to go by any means up there in Madison. And I think it's going to be an interesting couple of years up there in Madison. But at the end of the day, will be interesting to watch Wisconsin. Always a team, always a program that has the ability to find their way back up to the top. Just a little bit of work to do, it sounds like, in the offseason to get there. Notre Dame wins a game 28-7 where they look like Notre Dame. Probably for the first time this year, at least the Notre Dame that we've gotten accustomed to. They had 4 INTs in this game, and Leonard Moore, man, he is absolutely incredible. That is the best cornerback in the country by a pretty comfortable margin in some respects. That's an incredible football player, and I believe he's only a true sophomore, if I'm not mistaken. So, terrifying in every sense of the word. Incredible football player that will be incredible for quite some time for Notre Dame. C.J. Carr looks really comfortable in this offense right now. He looks like the guy that is going to be able to lead you to a 10-2 season and get you back in the CFP race. You got a tricky game against NC State coming up. I'm just going to be totally honest. Now, I think you should be able to win it. You're definitely going to be favored. I believe you are favored in that game right now. But at the end of the day, you got to be able to win out. And that's the big-time question around Notre Dame. It's not to say that they shouldn't win the rest of the games on their schedule. It's just to say it's really hard to win 10 games in a row, and they're on their way there right now, but still quite a bit of work to do. They look really good. I feel really confident in them moving forward. One small slip-up totally takes the season away. So, good team, continue to develop and see if you can just continue that focus week over week. Clemson finally gets a win and looks good doing it. 38-10 over North Carolina. It looked good. It looked like the offense that you expected to see. Now, the run game is still a problem. That's going to be a problem until, I don't know, until hopefully next season they find a way to figure it out. But at the end of the day, this is a team that finally looked like the football team that we expected to see early in the season. Now, they're playing a North Carolina team that is comically bad, is the word that I've come up with. It is terrible in a lot of different ways. And Bill Belichick is not doing a whole lot better with the pettiness that he's showing towards the Patriots, with just the negative energy and the negative PR that he is bringing to that program, not doing all that well. And I think the Belichick to UNC era is probably, it's getting close to trivia question territory. It's getting close to who coached the UNC Tar Heels in 2025, and that's about it. So I don't know what to make of it. I don't think it's going to get better. I don't think a lot of the stuff around it's going to get better. I think he's probably gone at the end of the year, and UNC is just trying to find a way to pick up the pieces. They'll be pretty lucky to find 5 wins. If I'm being totally honest, I don't think they're going to find 5 wins. So I'm just being plainly honest about North Carolina. It's not good, and I don't think it gets a whole lot better. For Clemson, I think you got to get to 8-4 to convince people not everything is burning down. Now, you might still be hard-pressed to convince people of that, but you get Boston College, SMU, then Duke before Florida State. You got to go 3-0, and those are 3 relatively tough teams. You probably should win those games. Duke is going to be a whole lot tougher. There's no doubt about that, but this is still a team that can beat just about anyone on their schedule, plain and simple. They still have a very high talent level. They still have a quarterback that is capable of playing at a high level. They still have dudes. So it'll be interesting to see what Clemson does the rest of the way. I don't know what all of that means for Clemson fans. I don't know if they'd feel satisfied if they find a way to win out and still miss the ACC championship. But at the end of the day, it's a fun team to watch. It's an interesting team to watch at the very least, in a case study of what happens with Dabo moving forward. Baylor was able to kind of escape with one here, 35-34, one that I just cannot believe the ending. Jace Brown's walking in for a touchdown, and his helmet comes off, and they rip it off, and he's in a position where the play has to be blown dead. He was walking in for a touchdown. He was in a position to absolutely win that game for Kansas State. They're forced to kick a field goal. Baylor walks right down the field and is able to return the favor, and then Kansas State gets blocked to end the game. It is a very tough way for that game to finish for Kansas State, and I think it's just kind of emblematic of what this season is. I don't think it's going to get a whole lot better for Kansas State. Now, they're playing better football. I just think they're going to play enough tough teams to where it's going to be really tough to stop the bleeding in a lot of ways. So we'll see what happens in the offseason. We'll see what happens the rest of the season for Kansas State. They obviously can play better football, and I tend to believe they will. But at the end of the day, just one of those games that you feel like you earned, you feel like you deserved, and you missed out on it. For Baylor, they needed this one really badly. They get a bye right before TCU and Cincinnati. They win those, and they're firmly in this mix. There's no doubt about that. That's going to be a really tall order for this team, especially because this defense continues to be a massive problem. I don't think it's going to get a whole lot better. How did Washington win this football game? I looked away in a lot of ways when Maryland was up 20-0 because I'm thinking, okay, Washington had the big-time game last week, was a little bit run down, traveled out there, and just didn't play their best football. No doubt about that, but Maryland went field goal, touchdown, field goal to open the game, and Washington was literally all over the place. They had nothing going for them offensively, and then it just flipped on a dime. The final 5 drives of the game, Washington scores 4 times, then they kneel the ball out to win the game. They go for 298 yards. Their defense gives up 52 in the final 4 drives for Maryland. It was a complete collapse for Maryland when they badly needed the win. If Maryland was able to get this one, they're 5-0. They're going into a Nebraska game on Friday where who knows what happens the rest of, or excuse me, Maryland gets Nebraska this weekend. Washington gets Rutgers this Friday. But at the end of the day, Maryland kind of needed this one, and I think this could be a sign of maybe it turning in the wrong direction. If they can beat Nebraska, everything's right back on track. I just don't have a lot of confidence in them beating Nebraska, at least as of right now. So we'll see what happens with Maryland moving forward. That's a tough loss to overcome. For Washington, it's one they badly needed, and they move forward. Still a shot. A lot of things to do. A lot of things to kind of take care of. If they get a win against Rutgers, which I expect them to do on Friday night, then they're in a position where they still get Oregon later in the season, at the very end of the season. If they're still alive at that very moment, everything's on the table for one game. Now, that's a tall order for a team that still has quite a few things to figure out, but you see the top end level in that back end of that game. I think this team can be dangerous the rest of the way. I think Ohio State just made them look a whole lot more benign than they actually are. Duke's able to win a game 45-21. Apologies for the Louisville Cal situation there, but at the end of the day, they're able to win this one. It was a duel in the first half. It was 28-21. There were 7 touchdowns on the first 10 total possessions of this game. And then Duke just took over. They totally dominated this game. They hit a big-time kick before halftime to stretch it to 10 points, and then it gets ugly from there. They're able to kind of expand this thing. Cal has a couple of turnovers in the second half, and Duke is very much in the ACC race. They're 3-0 with a bye coming up this week, and then they got a huge one against Georgia Tech. If they find a way to win that one, then they still have Virginia and Clemson, but they're in a great position moving forward. A weird team that lost 2 games out of conference, and a lot of people wrote off, but still very firmly in this thing, and in 2 weeks, it could very well be a game against Georgia Tech that decides who goes to the ACC Championship against Miami at the end of the year. For Cal, they're heading into a bye as well right before UNC or Virginia Tech. This is still a team very well worth watching. Going out on the rest of the season and into 2026, I'm very well hoping that JKS is sticking around there. It sounds like he is, but everything's still very up in the air for the future of college football in that sense. But 8 wins this season would be incredible, and I think they're very well on their way to doing that. A little group of 6 scoreboard here. USF gets a big-time win, 54-28 over Charlotte. We'll talk about the American coming up in a second. USF has a big-time game against North Texas Friday that we will talk about on Thursday. I promise you that. But a lot of things happening in the American. Navy's able to get a big win over Air Force, 34-31. Totally escaped in this one and very badly needed to. Memphis gets a dominating win over Tulsa. UCLA gets a good win over Wyoming in the snow up there. Pretty cool in that game. JMU gets a 7-point win where you're probably going to need to flex a little bit more. And as Old Dominion gets a dominating win, 47-7 over Coastal Carolina. So that Sun Belt race is going to be really fun. That American Conference race is going to be downright incredible. From start to finish, that thing is going to be absolutely crazy, and starts this Friday night with a huge one between South Florida and North Texas, and we will absolutely talk about it. I can promise you that, but we got something to talk about that isn't quite as fun to talk about as college football is, but it needs to be talked about. The Kyron Lacy situation, and I'm going to pick my words very carefully because I don't want to say anything out of turn, obviously, for obvious reasons, but the Kyron Lacy situation, if you don't remember, earlier last year, I can't exactly remember. I believe it was earlier this year because he was getting ready for the NFL draft. He had done the pro day. He had done some of that stuff. There was an incident involving Kyron Lacy where there was a hit and run, and he was charged with the hit and run, and he was going to court for it. They were kind of going through the proceedings, and his defense attorney continued to maintain his innocence. Throughout this entire process, he did not budge at all, and that's something that a lot of defense attorneys do in some respects. But at the end of the day, that was kind of the big-time story here, was the defense attorney just continued to push, and for good reason. He continued to push because it came out earlier last week before the games that it sounds like Kyron Lacy was not involved in that car wreck. It sounds like he was about 70 yards behind the wreck when it did happen. And since that time, as it was kind of all unfolding, Kyron Lacy decided to take his own life. During all of this time when he was building up to the trial, and it didn't look great for Kyron Lacy. If you remember a lot of the conversation around the college football world and beyond the college football world in a lot of respects around this, a lot of people made assumptions. A lot of people followed what some people said, and it created a energy around this kid, around this case, that it was going to be really hard to come back from, plain and simple. And I think everyone kind of understood that, and I think Kyron Lacy understood that, and I think that's the uniquely sad thing about this story is it was already really sad. It was already a kid that you had all this potential in the world, had unique amounts of talent, and was going to go to the NFL, and that was all kind of taken from him. And now it's more sad because it shouldn't have been taken from him. He didn't do anything wrong. He didn't hit that person. He didn't run away. He didn't do anything. And he had to take all of that. And I can't imagine what that's like. I can't imagine what that was like for Kyron. I can't imagine what it's been like for his family the rest of the way. A unique amount of respect to his defense lawyer because it's a very tough job in a lot of respects. And this is a very tough situation for a lot of people. But we have to talk about it. And I promise you this will not be the last time that we talk about this. This will be something that continues to unfold. It sounds like they're doing an investigation into the case right now, and they very well should. Because this kid very well deserves justice. I can promise you that. And it's not something that we're going to leave by the wayside. It's not something that anyone in college football should leave by the wayside, because this is a really upsetting story. And it's a really heartbreaking story of a uniquely talented kid whose future was taken from him, plain and simple. And I'm not really sure what more there is to say. I'd love to, get into it a little bit more deeply. I don't want to on here in some respects, so I'll leave it there for the time being. A uniquely sad story of a kid that was looking at the world, was looking at all of the opportunity that he absolutely earned, and it was taken away from him. And you just got to hope that his family, that the people around him get a little bit of justice moving forward, because I don't know, just uniquely frustrating, uniquely heartbreaking, and a kid that deserved a whole lot more in a lot of respects from a whole lot of people. So I'll leave it at that for the time being. I don't know how much better there is to say things for something like that, because it's one of those things that you never really prepare for, particularly in this line of work in some respects. You never prepare to talk about a situation like that, but you have to. If you leave that by the wayside, then it keeps happening to kids like Kyron Lacey, and that cannot happen. So that will not be the last time we talk about it. Hopefully there is some justice that is paid. Hopefully that family gets any semblance of peace that is possible as of right now after what happened. But at the end of the day, a uniquely tragic story that got a little bit more tragic and a whole lot more disgusting this past weekend. So we will talk about it more. Everyone should be talking about it. If people aren't talking about it, I'd frankly call them out for it. But at the end of the day, I'll leave it there for the time being. No reason to belabor it a little bit more. We will talk about it more as it unfolds, and hopefully it unfolds in some type of justice for Kyron Lacey. So we'll talk about that more. We'll leave it by the wayside for the time being. We got a huge weekend coming up next weekend. We got huge games across the board, massive ranked matchups. A game in Dallas that you probably thought was going to be a ranked matchup going into this weekend, no longer. And a lot of things to figure out over there at Texas, but they're also favored in that football game. We'll talk about it all on Thursday. I promise you that. We will get into everything going on this upcoming weekend on Thursday, and then we'll break it all down. We'll get into all the craziness that will unfold. I can promise you that, because I think that's just the way college football is going forward. But we'll talk about it all as it unfolds. We will get into it all, no doubt about it. But thank you so much for tuning in. Please do like, subscribe, comment, do all of that great stuff. But I'll see you guys on Thursday to break down a massive Week 7 slate.